Uh, Hi guys. So after a long hiatus, Neonato Hub is back to our academics now. So as you all know that we are already conducting our specialty series where we have our non-pediatric experts coming from various different faculties and coming to talk to us on various topics related to pediatrics and neonatology. So till date, if you recall, we have had a microbiologist and anesthetist. They have come to us and talked to us about their experience and their work. So today, I'm so happy to tell you that we have one more such expert coming to us from the field of nuclear medicine. I can personally vouch for the difficulty that most of us face in making decision about selection of the appropriate tests and further interpretation of these tests in our pediatric and neonatal practices. So, without wasting any further time, let me introduce you to our guest speaker for today. So today we have Dr. Rajlakshmi Jagtap with us. So Dr. Rajlakshmi is a nuclear medicine physician. She's currently the consultant and department in charge at Akshay Pet City Center at Sangli, and she's a really dear friend of mine. So much so that she has actually given me extra 15 or 20 minutes just to set up this entire talk. So I'm so glad to have Dr. Rajlakshmi with us. Welcome, Dr. Rajlakshmi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sonali.
I just want to mention one more thing here that due to some time and schedule restraints that we have been having for the last few days, we were unable to conduct this session as a live talk. So I will be posting a pre-recorded video of this session on Neonato Hub. From next time onwards, we'll have our live sessions as usual. But all of you guys are welcome to post any queries which you have related to this topic in the comment box below the video so that we can try to send those answers to you after discussing with our expert as at the earliest. Now, so I think I have taken a lot of time anyways. So without any further ado, let me present the mic over to you, Dr. Raj Lakshmi. Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, uh,
Uh,
I think you can start the screen sharing thing, no?
yes.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Today's topic for nuclear medicine is renal scintigraphy. But before I start, I would like to just give a small introduction about what nuclear medicine is. So, by definition, it is the use of unsealed radioisotopes for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. Now, what does unsealed mean? So, unsealed in this sense means that we are using a liquid or a gas, or in some cases, capsules, which can be taken orally. So, that consists of unsealed radioisotopes for us. Sometimes aerosols can also be used. Uh, Coming to scintigraphy. Now, what does scintigraphy mean? The definition of scintigraphy is a flash of light that is produced in a transparent material by the passage of a particle. Now, this can be any particle. In nuclear medicine, we talk either in terms of electrons or alpha particles or gamma radiation. So what happens is when this particle enters a transparent material, which we call as a detector, so a flash of light is produced, which is then captured, amplified, and then converted into an image, which is read by us. And there is an extremely complex system, but this is the basic of it. Now we have a very vast scope in nuclear medicine. We have diagnostics, we have therapeutics. Currently, in diagnostics, we are looking just for diagnostics, and in diagnostics, we have imaging and non-imaging related non-imaging related nuclear medicine scans. Now, coming to the imaging part, which is our point of focus today. So we have two categories in that. One is PET and one is SPECT. So PET stands for positron emission tomography. So this uses positron emitting isotopes for imaging. Now this is a basic difference of physics. So positron is we can say the equivalent of an electron but with a positive charge, and SPECT, it uses gamma emitting radio tracers for imaging. So the difference between these, we can say, is that we have better spatial resolution. In PET, SPECT does not give that much of a spatial resolution, and the systems that are used, that we look for in both are different. So this is just an overview of that. Coming to the agents that we use. So for PET, we use tracers like fluorine 18, gallium 68, etc. Whereas for SPECT, we use technetium 99, which is the main and most uh, widely used radionuclide in nuclear medicine. It is also called the workhorse of nuclear medicine, and that is because it has a very different radiochemistry that can be combined with a multiple variety of uh, I'm sorry, that can be combined with a multiple variety of other chemicals which can form different radio tracers for the purpose of imaging. The others like indium 111 or thallium 201, they are not very commonly used now because of certain limitations in their production and as well as availability. So coming back to our topic for the day, renal conditions. So why do we do scintigraphy in renal conditions? Our primary aims are for anatomical evaluation, functional imaging. We can find out GFR and ERPF in this. And the main thing that we do not see in any other imaging is differential function of each kidney that can be done in this. So a little brief about renal physiology. So the basic functional unit of the kidney is the nephron, and we have approximately 1 million nephrons in each kidney. So the renal plasma flows around 600 ml per minute, of which 20% is the GFR. So our average GFR should be around 120 ml per minute. So how does our scan work? How do we go ahead with the scan? So our prerequisites for the scan, we need basic is, hello, am I audible?
Yeah, Dr. Rajlakshmi, you're audible.
Sorry,
Actually, there was a slight delay in the screens which are coming up. I think it may be the network thing going on, but you're clearly audible. No issues at all.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Let's continue.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what are the prerequisites for our scan? So the first thing for the renal scans is plenty of hydration. In most cases, oral hydration should be sufficient. However, in some cases where the patient may not be able to take orally, we may need to give IV uh, fluids, but this is usually not required. Bladder catheterization is not necessary, but if there are any difficulties in micturition or there is some suspected bladder anomaly, we may actually go ahead and get catheterization done. So once this prerequisites are achieved, what we do is we inject the radio tracer or the radionuclide into the intravenous system. Now, this may be the camera, or we may give it and the acquisition may be acquired later. We will talk about this more in the later part of the presentation. Now, this is excreted by either the kidneys or whatever organ we are targeting for that particular scan. And then the gamma camera, which is used in SPECT imaging, these that will be capturing decay, uh, the decayed gamma particles. So here is the gamma camera. Here we see that this is one head. There is a detector inside this, and this is the other head. So this whole array, it rotates on a 360 degrees, and any amount we can position it any way we want. This is the table where the patient
Um,
lies down.
One second. I'm so sorry to barge in. Actually, Dr. Rajlakshmi, the photo of the machine got displayed a few seconds late. Can you just start explaining the machine
Sure.
once again? Because it is now clearly visible, but initial part got missed because the transition took
Okay, okay.
time.
I'll definitely start over. So this here is one head of the gamma camera, and this is the second head. So each of these heads, it has a detector which will basically capture the radiation that is emitted, which is injected into the patient. This has a whole array of processing inside, and it will then convert the emitted radiation into images. So there are some instances where you can have even a single head. There are some machines which have three heads also, but this is the most common and the most ideal. The heads, they rotate on 360 degrees, and they can be used for any positioning, including vertical if the patient has to be standing. The table, this is where the patient will lie down. It also moves, and this is a sliding bed which will actually take the patient inside. And this bore that you see here, that is where the patient, the part of the patient that is not being imaged, is usually held. And this area that I'm marking, this is the area where maximum of the acquisition is going to be taking place. So now, coming to our renal scintigraphy. So, what systems are we seeing? What are the renal subsystems rather that we will be seeing? So, first, there are some agents that we will be using for seeing the glomerular filtration. Then there are some substances for tubular secretion. There are a few agents, all of these are excreted in the pelvic calyceal system, as well as the urinary ureters and the bladder, and these also can be studied using our scans. So what are the agents that we use, and what sites are they usually localized in? So for GFR, uh, chromium EDTA, that actually is a non-imaging agent, which is for total the renal function and also for the plasma flow. So this will give us both. Whereas for ERPF, usually now we do not use iodine-based agents. Our most common agents are now MAG3 or EC, that is 99 technetium 99 EC that we use, which is used for ERPF. So this will give us just the ERPF, and it has a tubular agent, and it has a very good spatial resolution, and the image quality is better. For static imaging, we have technetium DMSA, which accumulates in the proximal tubules, and it will also give us the differential function. Dynamic imaging is basically when we inject under camera, and the images are acquired sequentially. So for that, these are the agents DTPA, Hipuran, and MAC3. And for cystogram, again, we can use either of the agents that are accumulated in the bladder. So coming to the site of these renal imaging agents. So for GFR, we are using mainly technetium DTPA. This is mainly because we get very good image quality, as well as it is easy for production. For imaging of tubular system, we are commonly using MAG3 or EC. Also, for static imaging in this, we use DMSA or glucoheptonate. Glucoheptonate is currently not so much in use because of the ease of production of technetium DMSA. So a lot of questions that have been asked are, what is the difference between static imaging and dynamic imaging? So in static imaging, what happens is that the radio tracer is injected to the patient. We have to wait for a specified period of time, and then the images are captured in various positions. They can be anterior, posterior, or any of the oblique views that might be required depending on the patient requirements. Dynamic imaging means that the radio tracer is injected under the gamma camera itself, and we are capturing the transit of the radio tracer through the target organ. Now, this is true for all imaging, not just for renal imaging. Even hepatobiliary imaging, we may need to take any dynamic images. Now, coming to static imaging. So, for static imaging, our commonest indications are pyelonephritis, uh, kidney disease, acute or chronic, for assessment of scars or resolution of infections, differential functions, and for evaluation of congenital anomalies like agenesis or ectopic kidneys, fused kidneys, etc. So for the images, the agents used for static imaging, DMSA is the most common. GHA has been used previously, but currently it has fallen out of use because, as I mentioned previously, DMSA is very easy to make and it gives us better imaging quality. So, coming to the procedure, the basic rule that we should maintain is good hydration. Oral hydration is usually sufficient. If needed, we can give IV as and when needed. So, 3 to 5 millicurie of technetium is injected to the patient, and the images may be taken 2 to 4 hours later in various views. These are the commonest views: anterior, posterior, and these oblique views. So, how do we interpret a DMSA scan? Now, this is a normal DMSA scan. The first box shows you the anterior view, where you can see this here is the right kidney and this here will be the left kidney. This is the posterior view, and this, if you can see, the margins are better delineated. This here is the left kidney, this is the right kidney. In renal imaging, posterior imaging is preferred because the kidneys are retroperitoneal and hence they will be closer to the camera that acquires posteriorly, to the detector that acquires posteriorly. Oblique views are usually taken so that one of the kidneys moves closer to the detector, and then the imaging can be acquired, and this can pick up smaller anomalies or smaller defects in the cortex. Coming to a few abnormal DMSA scans, the first image here, this, if you can see this large uh, wedge-shaped area, so this is basically a formation of a scar. So this patient has suffered from pyelonephritis, and these are what we call as cold spots. There is one here in the upper pole and a smaller here in the upper pole of right kidney. These are posterior images. Here you can see that there is some excretion into the bladder. We have excellent background clearance, however, for this patient. And in this, the major point that we have to resolve is whether it is an acute infection. Even an acute infection can present with cold spots like this. So what we need to do is to determine between scar and an acute infection. We need to do another DMSA scan at 3 months down the line, so that if it is a persistent cold spot, that will mean that it is a scar. But if the acute infection has resolved, then the cold spot will not be seen, and we can conclude that whatever cold spot was seen previously was in fact an acute infection there. This here is a horseshoe shaped kidney. We can see they are connected inferiorly. These are both the moieties that we can see here. This is an uncomplicated horseshoe shaped kidney because we do not see any obstruction that has been happening here. This is a pelvic kidney. Now, in a posterior view, the pelvic kidney is slightly more anterior, so we see it a little more faintly. This the left kidney is seen in its normal position, and it does not, neither of the kidneys, they are showing any obstruction or any loss of function. Let's come to dynamic imaging. So as previously explained, dynamic imaging is when the radio tracer has been injected under the camera, and we are seeing the transit of the tracer through under camera in sequential form. So what are the major indications? So we see the renal perfusion and the function in this. The commonest indication is obstructive uropathy. Renovascular hypertension is also renovascular hypertension is an indication not usually in pediatric age group. It's for evaluation of renal transplants as well as for donor evaluations. These last three indications are not so common in pediatric setups, but this is for the sake of completion. So what are the commonest agents that are used? For glomerular filtration, we use DTPA. This is specifically used to look for GFR. And for tubular secretion, either we use MAG3 or EC. In Indian setting, EC is easier to produce and it gives us a better image quality. So for most of the practical purposes in India, EC is used whenever we are looking for tubular secretion. So the procedure for this is nearly identical in terms of hydration. Oral hydration suffices. The radio tracer is given under the camera and the imaging is carried out for 20 to 30 minutes. Now, in some cases, Lasix may be given. It may either be given along with the DTPA injection, or it may be given after a while, depending on what is the requirement of the scan, whether any obstruction has to be ruled out or not. This is the normal uh, dynamic scan. For the first 30 seconds, what we are looking is for the perfusion of the kidneys. Now, in this case, you can see that within a few seconds of giving the injection, this here is where the injection is going from. And here we see that the kidneys start appearing within a few seconds of the perfusion of the injection. So this means that the perfusion of the kidneys is good. There is a good blood supply going to the kidneys. The second one is this in the second box. What we see is the cortical transit of tracer. So as you see, the kidneys are getting progressively darker, and the bladder is gradually filling up. So this is basically telling you of the function of the cortex, of how good the either the glomerular apparatus or the tubular secretion, whether it is functioning well or not. And the last box, it shows us the clearance. So in this we can see that gradually the kidneys are getting lighter and lighter, and the bladder is starting to fill up. So this means that there is no obstruction anywhere in the system until the bladder is filling up. A major part of interpreting renal scans is the time activity curve. So this is our first time activity curve, which is a normal curve. So there is a sharp rise, which is corresponding with our cortical uptake, and this is the excretion. So excretion this represents around the first 2 to 3 minutes, and this then is the gradual up till 20 minutes. This is excreted over a period of 20 minutes. In obstructed renal systems, there will be no clearance. The curve will gradually keep rising, and you will not see it fall at all. Now, this type of curve is when there is a functional obstruction. If you have given a diuretic at this point of time, you immediately see that it falls because of the greater uh, volume which accumulates in the renal pelvic ileal systems, and all of it is flushed out, which causes the time activity curve to fall. This here is an equivocal type of curve, and here this is called as delayed compensation, where the decrease in where the tracer is excreted after some time of giving the diuretic injection. So here is an obstructed kidney. If you see this, this is the left kidney and the right kidney is which is obstructed. So in gradual images, if you see, there is the right
Uh,
kidney.
Dr. Rajlakshmi,
Yes,
uh, I think we are still stuck on the time activity curve slide. Have you changed the slide to the
yes,
next one?
I have.
Then there is a lag. Yeah, then there is a lag. There is a slight lag
Uh,
because in my screen, no, I can just see the time activity curve right now.
okay,
Yeah, it is now. Now it is the
oh,
next slide, obstruction slide.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So coming to the slide for obstruction, if we can see the left kidney here is filling properly, and the excretion is also fine while the size of the bladder is increasing. The right kidney, however, is a different thing. There is only, it just keeps on filling, it keeps getting darker and darker, but there is no excretion happening. Now this is the time activity curve. This is for the left kidney. As you see, it rises sharply and it falls sharply. So this is a good functioning kidney, whereas for the right kidney, it just keeps on rising. There is absolutely no excretion going on here, and whatever tracer has been taken up by the kidney is not being injected. You even do not see the filling of the pelvic ileal system here. This means that this is the right kidney here is an obstructed system. Coming to renovascular hypertension, so this is what is commonly called as a captopril scan for renal artery stenosis. This is not a very commonly dealt topic in pediatrics, but I would like to just cover this. So captopril scan, we go on the premise of our angiotensin system. So when there is a renal artery stenosis, there is fall in the GFR due to decrease in the blood flow. So this will activate our renin-angiotensin system, and it subsequently causes angiotensin 2 dependent hypertension due to vasoconstriction. So for this procedure, for this scan, we can either do a 1-day procedure or a 2-day procedure. So first, what we have to acquire a baseline scan. There is a lot of patient preparation required for this. The patient might be on some antihypertensives. There may be ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers, blocking agents. These have to be stopped depending on the half-life of the individual drug. Diuretics are supposed to be stopped for at least a week. Patient has to be well hydrated and no solid food should be given for 4 hours prior to imaging. The first scan that we acquire is a baseline scan. This scan we do so that we have an idea of what the baseline GFR of the patient is. In case the baseline GFR is very low, in that case, we will not go ahead with the captopril injection, as this might further compromise the renal vasculature and the patient might actually end up in renal failure. So this baseline scan has to be acquired. The second, once that is established, then we can either do the captopril post captopril scan on the same day, or we may if it is to be done on the same day, then we need to give a gap of at least 4 to 6 hours, or we can schedule it for the next day. So for in that for the captopril scan, we give oral captopril, or we give injection of enalaprilat, and The scan is acquired after injection, it is acquired after 15 minutes. The DTP injection is given, and then we give a dynamic imaging. This is a dynamic scan. So we are looking for various factors here. We look for change in the curve pattern. We look for if there is any difference, change in the split function. A change of more than 10% is considered significant. There are different ratios and a lot of other factors, parameters that we consider for interpretation of this scan. Let's come to transplant evaluation. This is usually done after transplants to look for either rejection or acute tubular necrosis, sometimes surgical complications like leaks or hematomas. In rare cases, there may be complications of renal artery stenosis or any thrombosis happening. All of these, they can be uh, evaluated with the transplant evaluation. Usually more than one scan is required, and it is we have to compare with the previous scan in order to interpret this. Coming to radionuclide cystography, this is the indication. The indication for this is VUR. So the procedure here is that a radioactive substance is introduced into the bladder. So this may be either done in two ways, either directly, where we use a catheter and the radio tracer is induced in a retrograde manner, or indirect, which is in which it is done as a part of the renal scintigraphy. The bladder imaging is done after we have finished either a DTPA or DMSA scan. In this, the procedure is that the bladder is full, and the patient, if the patient can urinate on their own, the patient is asked to urinate in standing position, and dynamic images are taken. If if the patient is a neonate, the voiding is in a diaper and in a supine position. So how do we interpret these scans? If you see this, this is a dynamic study, and we see that there is a reflux of tracer which is going right up till the renal pelvic systems. So this,
Dr. Rajlakshmi, once again, it's the transition of the slides is just happening. Yeah, it is now the interpretation slide.
okay. Uh, so in this, if we can see this here, this bladder is full, and once the patient has started voiding, there is a reflux of tracer which is going right up till the uh, pelvic systems. So this indicates a reflux, uh, at least grade 5 reflux into the pelvic system. Thank you. That's all I have on the presentation front today. Dr. Sonali, back to
Again,
you.
again the slide is taking some time to transition.
Okay.
So I think that was the only slight glitch that we had today. But thank you so much, Dr. Rajlakshmi, for such a wonderful, like concise session on actually, trust me, a very difficult topic when it comes to a clinician. Okay, because half the time I know, and if I may, I'm actually speaking from the part of the residents. It's very easy to say that we are going to do a renal scan for a patient, but to
Yes.
actually understand the meaning of the scan and what are the different types which goes into it, just to understand that DMSA and DTPA and EC cannot be said in one single breath. Those are three individual different scans that we are talking about, and
Yes.
how to individualize it to the patient depending on whatever is our say differential diagnosis or our line of thought for the patient. That is something that you have actually made very easy through your slides today. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
many are going to benefit actually.
I'm
Uh,
glad to be here, Dr. Sonali.
and for all of you who are listening and who are seeing this presentation, there's one more thing that I would love to tell you guys, that It's midnight. It's 12 a.m. right now, and Dr. Rajlakshmi is still with us patiently. Uh, so thanks a million for that. Seriously, thank you so much for that part. But you do know that I'm not going to just thank you and let you go. We are going to have a small few queries related to the topic so that we can end it
Pleasure is all
beautifully.
mine.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
Dr. Raj Lakshmi, so there were a few things that actually I wanted to personally ask you. One was about your PET scan and the SPECT scan, which you told us about in the introduction part. Uh, could you just clarify it a little bit more for us? Like the PET scan and the SPECT scan, which you said, no? So, what exactly is the difference between them? Like, if I'm asking from the clinical side also. Uh,
Yes. For as a nuclear medicine physician, I will mostly speak in terms of physics. But as a clinician, what our general clinician will need to understand is that they are both different modalities. In a PET scan, usually it is a whole body scan, mostly used for detection of malignancies. That can be either staging or treatment response, or you have n number of things going on there. Whereas a SPECT scan, usually it is we want to look for a particular system. In this case, we have looked for say renal system, but there
okay.
are others like we have our hepatobiliary system, or we have the skeletal system. So it is usually more concentrated in if you ask me, the resolution of a PET scan is much better, spatial resolution, but it will give us a different set of information. Although the information in the information in a SPECT scan is different. They have a slightly lower spatial resolution, but we get much more of a functional information in a SPECT scan. So you can target what system you want to use in a SPECT scan. Like we have renal, now we are doing dealing with renal today.
Right.
We can have hepatobiliary, so on and so forth.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, out of the scans, like, of course, when you are with us, we are not going to limit our questions to the renal part of it. So, what are the different types of scans that act, especially considering the pediatric or say the neonatal population? So, like the common clinical scenarios or something where the scans are being prescribed by, or like the
Okay.
common scans which you do in this age population kind of thing.
Okay, so apart from our general, apart from the renal scans that we have just discussed, we commonly we get HIDA scans, usually
Yeah.
for neonatal jaundice. So we either look, we want to differentiate between hepatitis or biliary atresia.
Yeah.
There are a few scans for evaluation of nectus diverticulum. Usually, maybe around 7 to 10 years of age is the commoner age group for these scans. Uh, the patient will present with pain in abdomen and so forth. In some patients, they come for evaluation of intractable seizures.
Right.
Usually, it's a neurologist who has referred them. They want to look for any foci of seizures in case they are planning for surgery. So this will usually be done along with an MRI. So MRI is obviously obtained in a different department, and the most important I want to mention is thyroid scans. In
Okay. Yeah.
pediatric age group, uh, they are usually used for congenital abnormalities, either ectopic thyroids or say non-functional thyroids. I want to make a special mention of Pendrin's syndrome here, which organification of iodine is a component. So there is something called as perchlorate discharge test. I think this is not
Yeah.
very well known, but it is a very good test to find out if your patient might need any thyroxine supplements. in the future. And it is very important to diagnose pendrids very early in life. Otherwise, it can cause severe developmental problems for the child,
Yeah.
considering that they have an organification problem.
So as I said, no, that most of us actually, it's the more you know that what are the available options, what are the best tests available, the more you will be
Yeah.
outgoing to do it. Uh, because I think if we don't know about this test, we are going to maybe go on to an ultrasound, maybe max to max a CT or something. But if we can get the functional information, it goes a long way in the
Yes,
patient management, actually, if you see. So,
definitely.
yeah. Uh, yeah, so basically for today's talk, our major confusion when it comes to an antenatally diagnosed hydronephrosis in a newborn baby. Actually, we have had a talk on antenatal hydronephrosis on Neonato Hub also. So
Yes.
here, every single clinician would be having this doubt that if you are telling me that we need to do renal scan at say 1.5 month of life, like 6 weeks or 8 weeks renal scan, then which
Yes.
scan to do? Basically, what is the scan? Tell me the name of the scan. This is the common question that everyone has. And I think all those who are listening to the talk today, even if they can take home this part, it is still huge. Like, what scan do we advise to the patient? Like, do we tell them DMSA? Do we tell them DTPA? We tell them EC? What?
Okay, the scan that you want to order, it will depend on what information you want. Now, if we are looking for say functional abnormal, any anatomical uh, defect for the patient, we are looking for cortical scars. In that case, we would advise DMSA scan for the patient, which will give us a better a delineation. Like the patient has reflux and there is a lot of scars due to chronic reflux. Now, in patients of hydronephrosis, we want to look for obstruction.
Yeah.
So in younger patients, we talk about neonates or say those are less than a year old. We usually prefer EC scan or MAG3 scan, uh, simply because the glomerular apparatus is not very well developed in younger children, in infants or in neonates, and EC scan will also give us a better imaging quality if we are
Okay.
looking just for obstruction. Now, if we are, this will also give us the differential function in case there is excessive damage to the kidney or excessive compromise of renal function. It will give us differential function.
Yeah.
DTPA scan, I will advise only if GFR is to be estimated. So this will be in usually maybe slightly older children in case any procedure is being planned. DTPA scan will also give us information regarding the obstruction, but because it is primarily a glomerular agent, uh, for
Well, yeah.
if yeah, sorry, please go on.
No, no. So what you mean is that the EC scan, even for the baby, specifically, we have this question where we
Yeah,
have a child who is, say, 1 day old or 2 day old and who has massive bilateral hydronephrosis. Those are the only case scenarios where we go for the scan even on day one, day two. So we don't wait for a month also because we have to take immediate decision on the management and sometimes, most of the time, surgical ones. So yeah, we have ordered EC scan and that has proven to be beneficial in most of the cases. But to
yes.
understand
So
the
in these
actual,
patients in EC scan, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, please, please go on.
So I was just answering the query. So EC scan for neonates in obstruction, EC scan is the one that I would recommend.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, please continue, Dr. Sonali.
So, no, actually, as I said, no, this was the major query which every one of us has. Everyone, trust me, no exception. Because anytime that we have a child like this, even even at a very, very senior level, at the consultant level also, most of the times you would be getting calls to ask, to confirm once before we send the patient that I'm thinking of a scan, and which scan should I do, right? So EC is what we have discussed with
Yes.
our physicians as well. Okay, now coming to the nitty-gritties, actually, I can say. So just a single line questions, but can you give us an estimate of how much is the cost that we are thinking of uh, when we talk about the scans? Like if you say for a
Uh,
renal scan,
so the cost can be anywhere between 5 to 10,000, depending on the institute, the availability of radio tracer, and their distance from a major city
yeah,
from where the supply actually occurs. So maximum, I feel, in most institutes it's in the range of 5 to 7,000, but in some cases it may be around 10,000, or that is a slightly rarer scenario. But these are, I'm just talking about renal scans. Different scans obviously have different cost procedures, and maybe calling the institute where you plan to send the patient beforehand and confirming is always a better option.
yeah, because that is one thing that most of us also think, that when it comes to nuclear scans, this is a very expensive thing. But if you come to think of it, for a child, if we can plan our management immediately, then 5 to 10,000 is actually not very big, considering the number of days of morbidity in the child. The scans are worth them. uh, the other thing I wanted to ask was, do we actually need anesthesia for each and every scan when we, like, do you need the child to be absolutely immobile, like how we say in MRI or something? Or,
Uh,
yeah,
sorry, please go on.
no, the same thing. That is anesthesia actually needed for each and every baby, like say a neonate, or because see most of the in if we consider the renal scan part, we are
Mhm.
actually worried about giving any medication or
Yeah.
say any anesthetic medication specifically, because there is some degree of dysfunction in the kidneys already. So
Yes.
do we require anesthesia for every kid, or is it individualized or something like?
Anesthesia is usually not required for every child. Something as simple as pedicloral is usually enough.
Yeah,
We need complete immobilization. If the child is sleeping, nothing like it. The average duration of the procedure itself on table is around 30 minutes, give or take a few minutes. There might be some additional images might need to be taken after an interval of some time. But if the child is sleeping well, the child is well fed, uh, we usually do not need anesthesia unless it is extremely difficult to control the child. In those cases, we might consider it.
right. And what about the feeding status? Like, do we require to keep the baby NBM, or uh, how should we
No,
plan the feed?
as we have discussed previously, the hydration should be maintained. Uh, Food can be maybe 2 hours. You can hold solid foods for older
Yeah,
children. For younger children, there is no such need to hold feeds. It will in fact make the positioning and the scanning more difficult if the baby is asleep. They might not fall asleep easily. So
yeah,
a well-fed baby is a happy baby.
definitely. And a happy
Yeah.
baby is a happy pediatrician. So that is true.
Yes.
So basically, we are saying that apart from the anesthesia requirements or anything, if particularly is needed, but apart from that, the scans per se do not require to keep the baby like NBM for a long time or anything like that.
No, no,
Okay.
no, not, no specific
Yeah.
NBN status is required unless it is an anesthesia requirement.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about the radiation risk? Because we always think of big machine and big radiation. So is it actually, because this is one thing which even the parents ask us, that how big is the radiation risk?
Okay, so actually, this is a very common question that I'm asked, not just for kids, but even a lot of clinicians, they come with this question. So, no, the radiation risk is not huge. It is, in fact, less than your normal CT scan that you would acquire.
Okay, okay, that's nice.
But the even a small even a small risk is something that when it comes to your pediatric age group, the parents do not want to take even a small risk. Since to reduce the risk, what we can counsel the patients, the parents rather, is that there should be, as coming back to the basics, hydration. Hydration, because these are usually excreted by way of the kidney. Most of the radiopharmaceuticals, not just the renal tracers, but others also, give plenty of water. Let the child, if it's an older child, let the child urinate frequently. If it is a younger child, change diapers more frequently. Whatever that can be done to avoid the urine being stored in the bladder or in the near the perineal area to reduce the risk of radiation to that specific area. Already, because the doses that we give to kids are depend based on their weight, so we give very low amount of doses. But
Okay.
still, even these are extra precautions to reduce the risk further.
Yeah. So the earlier the radioactive material gets excreted from the body, the lesser the risk. So
The lesser is the
that's,
risk. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, I think I've actually taken you from one day to the other. It's nearly 12:30 right now. I'm so sorry for that.
Ah,
Uh, just a last question, that having you here on a platform, we have a person from nuclear medicine talking to the pediatricians, especially the pediatric residents, who are the most important crowd that our channel caters to. So, what would be your messages, like, uh, for the clinicians, about how to get the child, like, say, the prerequisites, the post procedural things, and all? From your side, if you have to give some message to us, what would it be?
okay. So what I would like to tell is, communicate with your nuclear medicine physician. Tell them what your indication is. Sometimes they can judge what scan might actually be more beneficial to the patient and what will give you the maximum information that is required either for your diagnosis or for your treatment. So communicate your need very clearly to your nuclear medicine physician. That is what I would say primarily.
Yeah.
Second thing that I want to tell is, uh, the patient should be very well counseled. These scans often tend to be a little on the expensive spectrum,
Yeah.
uh, and the patients, they have to be counseled accordingly regarding the costs of the scan, the duration of the procedure. Usually, although the under camera time I say is around 30 minutes, but the time in the department can often be around 4 to 6 hours. Children get cranky, then the parents, they get impatient, so they should
Yeah.
be counseled beforehand that the wait in the hospital is going to be of a longer duration. uh, the patient, the patient's relatives should be advised to contact the department at least 1 or 2 days prior. Some scans, like we've discussed, the captopril scan, it takes around 5 days to 1 week of preparation. So
Okay.
coming to the department and expecting that the scan is going to be done stat is going to be a little, it may not be practical for all cases. So
Yeah.
contact the department beforehand.
No, and it's actually true. Like, I think we have had our talk directly also some time back, that most of the nuclear medicine scans are not something which are your emergency scans. Okay, they can be very well
Exactly.
planned, and actually planning them prior makes it easier for everyone, including the patient and the patient's relative as well, because we obviously can't send a kid twice for the same scan. So it's better to take
Exactly.
some time and plan the procedure properly rather than rushing. And
Rushing to the department.
yeah, and I think most of the clinicians, like when I'm actually interacting with you and when we are having talks about all this topic, one major thing which I realized was that whenever we are thinking about a nuclear medicine scan, it's not something like your ultrasound, right? Where you go and the machine is ready and you just do it and you expect the result. It's actually
Yeah.
a lot of efforts on your side, even planning, making the material available. Then
Yes.
there is a lot of technicalities actually which go in. So
Exactly.
yeah.
So,
So
if I may I explain in brief the procedure on what goes on behind the scenes, if that's
yeah,
okay?
please, please, please.
So once the patient comes to our department, we have to assess what scan is to be done for the patient, whether the patient needs a DTPA scan or DMSA or EC. Then accordingly, it is made in our department. So we get kits for this, we get kits for DMSA, we get kits for DTPA, but those kits, they have to be labeled with technetium. So depending upon what the procedure is, the labeling procedure can take anywhere from 10 minutes to 45 minutes.
Okay.
And this is not just for the renal scans, it is for all the nuclear medicine scans. Uh, if you are talking of PET scans, we may have to acquire the tracer from somewhere else. We may have to place previous orders. It may not be available on the same day. So
Yeah.
once we have that ready, some of them, they need to be cooled. Some processing might be involved, and then we have to determine if it is safe to inject to the patient. We have to run a few tests to determine its what we call as QC, or the qualitative check, the quality check for that. If it is, and once we determine it is safe to be injected, after that we inject it to the patient. So this procedure usually it can take anywhere between half an hour to 2 hours or even more.
Yeah.
So, but we cannot start this procedure unless the patient is in the department. Hence, the increase in waiting time.
Yeah.
Uh, for renal scans, there is one point that I would like to add. The patient, when the patient comes to the department, the hydration should be good. Otherwise, what happens is like it also maintains a good clinical status. But if the hydration is not good, it may affect the scan results.
Yeah.
It will give
Yeah.
us poor
Actually.
clearance. Yeah, it gives us a poor clearance of tracer, and it may actually underestimate what the renal function is.
Yeah. So what we are saying is that hydration is not just for the clinical benefit of the patient. It's actually the scan which you're doing, the interpretation which you want cannot be optimized unless you optimize the hydration status of the patient in the first place. Uh,
Exactly, exactly.
yeah. Okay. Uh, what about the radiation risk which you said about the excretion which is occurring? So obviously that means that the excretion is occurring in the diapers, right?
Exactly.
So all those things I think will be one other important point which are at least pediatric residents should be knowing, that these diapers are then highly radioactive. Uh,
Yes.
so at
Uh,
least if the patient is in ward or something, we better keep them away from the.
Away from the other
Yeah,
patients.
right.
So, although the radiation risk is small, but there is no like we are working on a risk versus benefit premise here. So we are justifying the risk to the child who has been, or to the neonate who has been investigated. We cannot justify that risk to the other patients in the ward. So
Yeah.
this patient, as far as possible, should be isolated at least for maybe 1 or 2 days till the radiation is reduced. The diapers, rather than throwing them in the biomedical waste straight away, they will have to be stored for a period of 2 to 3 days before disposing them off. Same goes with the clothes that might be contaminated with the urine.
Okay.
One important point that I want to stress here is, if the patient's mother, if the pediatric patient's mother is pregnant, that pregnant female has to be kept away from the patient for at least a period of 2 days in cases of SPECT scan. If it is a PET scan that we are doing, 1 day is sufficient.
Okay. Okay. So
So,
more the amount of substance and
yeah,
more the activity. Yeah. So we don't want to harm the fetus that way.
exactly, exactly. PET tracers usually have shorter half-lives, so they are excreted more quickly. Technetium, it has a half-life of 6 hours, so the excretion time is a little bit longer, and hence the need for a longer, uh, say you can say longer time, where you have to take care of the radiation safety. So frequent changing of diapers, more urination, and maybe a little away from the other pediatric patients.
Okay. Okay. Uh, I think that sums it up. Yeah, that about sums it up. So I know we can never have enough of this. And I'll be very frank with you. From the time that we have started this collaboration between the multi speciality collaboration, if I may say so, it's very interesting to have this discussion. More than the actual talk, the discussion is something which is like really, really turning out to be invaluable. Okay, because we can pick so much from your actual experience working in the field, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Thank you so much for it.
I think the pleasure is mine. I think yours is a wonderful platform, and it's extremely informative, especially to the upcoming residents. Uh, it's a great place to share ideas and obtain information.
So I normally don't leave our guest without putting up that underhanded "ki hope to see you soon" thing. So we'll see when we can see you again and with what topic.
I I will be definitely delighted to join you again and share my insights on whatever might be needed. I'm
And
always happy to be here.
and I promise that next time it will be in like a proper daytime and I'll not keep you awake till midnight because it's exact 12:30 and I'm so much thankful that you could come to us even at this time just because the days have been busy. So thank you so much, Dr. Rajlakshmi, and
Thank you, Dr. Sonali.
I think we'll just end the session here. Yeah. Chalo, bye.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. Okay, bye bye. Thank you.